Thomas Whitfield dropped his coffee cup, the ceramic shattering against the kitchen floor as he watched his housemaid through the frost-covered window. Rachel was standing in the empty barn, her lips moving in animated conversation with someone who wasn't there. This wasn't just strange behavior. She was begging invisible figures not to take her back to the dark place. Mrs. Henderson from the general store stumbled backward off the porch steps, her face white as winter snow. The wooden crate of supplies crashed to the ground, apples rolling across the frozen earth like scattered prayers. Tom's weathered hands trembled as he remembered his daughter Mary's voice, the same desperate pleading he'd heard 3 years ago before she vanished forever. Rachel's auburn hair caught the morning light exactly the way Mary's used to, and that terrified him more than he dared admit. "Sweet Jesus," he whispered, reaching for his coat. "What happened to you, girl?" Who was Rachel really? And why did watching her feel like staring at a ghost? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Thomas Whitfield had spent 47 years learning to read the signs that mattered. The way wheat bent before a storm, the subtle shift in a horse's gait that meant trouble, the particular silence that settled over the prairie when something wasn't right. But nothing in his weathered existence had prepared him to read the signs written across Rachel's haunted face. The young woman had appeared at his kitchen door 6 months ago, clutching a carpetbag that looked older than she was, and wearing a dress that had seen too many hard miles. "I'm looking for work, sir," she'd said, her voice carrying the kind of exhaustion that sleep couldn't cure. "I can cook, clean, mend. I don't eat much, and I don't ask questions." Tom had needed help around the farmhouse ever since Ellen and Mary died in that terrible wagon accident 3 years back. The 2-story structure felt too big, too quiet, too full of memories that echoed in every corner. Rachel's presence had filled some of that emptiness, though she moved through the rooms like a ghost herself, silent and careful, as if she was afraid of disturbing something sacred. She was a puzzle wrapped in contradictions. Despite claiming to be from back east, she knew instinctively how to work a prairie farm. Her hands understood the rhythm of milking cows, the proper way to gather eggs without spooking the hens, the exact temperature for churning butter. She cooked with recipes that tasted achingly familiar, flavors that reminded Tom of Sunday dinners when his house had been full of laughter. But it was the small things that unsettled him most. The way she hummed lullabies he was certain he'd never taught her. How she flinched whenever he mentioned his dead family, as if the words caused physical pain. The fact that she never received mail, never spoke of relatives, never mentioned a past beyond vague references to troubles back east. Rachel had eyes the color of spring grass and auburn hair that caught fire in the afternoon sun streaming through the kitchen windows. She was perhaps 22, though hardship had carved lines around her eyes that made her seem older. There was a fragility about her, like a bird with a broken wing that had learned to fly again but never quite trusted the sky. Tom's farm sat 3 miles outside Cedar Valley, Kansas, where the endless wheat fields met the broader sky. It was good land, honest land, though the mortgage payments had grown harder since Ellen's steady hands no longer helped with the harvest. The farmhouse itself was solid, built from local timber and stones pulled from the fields by Tom's own hands. Ellen had planted roses by the front porch that still bloomed each spring, a splash of pink against the weathered wood. Cedar Valley was the kind of town where everyone knew everyone's business, where secrets were harder to keep than promises, which made Rachel's presence all the more mysterious. In a place where strangers were as rare as summer snow, she had simply appeared one morning like morning mist, and no one seemed to question where she'd come from. The morning that changed everything started like any other, with Tom checking on the livestock before dawn. The October air carried the promise of frost, and he pulled his coat tighter as he made his way to the barn. What he found there stopped him cold. Rachel knelt in the far corner, her fingernails bloody and broken, carving letters into the wooden beam with desperate mechanical precision. Mary. Over and over, the same 4 letters, carved so deep they'd scarred the wood permanently. Her nightgown was torn at the knees, her hair wild and tangled, and she was humming. That damn lullaby again. Hush now, my baby, don't you cry. Papa's gonna sing you a lullaby. The melody drifted from her lips like smoke from a dying fire, haunting and familiar. Tom's breath caught in his throat. It was the same song he used to sing to Mary when nightmares woke her, the same tune Ellen had hummed while braiding their daughter's auburn hair. Rachel? His voice came out rougher than intended. She didn't stop carving, didn't even look up. Blood from her torn fingernails mixed with wood shavings, creating dark stains on the barn floor. "She's calling for her papa," Rachel whispered, her voice distant and hollow. "She's scared and alone and she's calling, but he can't hear her. Why can't he hear her?" Tom's knees nearly buckled. "Who's calling, Rachel?" "Mary." The name fell from her lips like a prayer. "She's lost in the dark place, and the man who saves people won't let her come home. He says her papa doesn't want her anymore. He says her papa thinks she's dead." The world tilted sideways. Tom gripped the barn door frame, his calloused hands shaking. "Rachel, how do you know that name?" For the first time, she looked up at him, and what he saw in her green eyes made his chest tighten with recognition and terror. There was something familiar there, something that reached into his soul and twisted. "I don't know," she whispered, genuine confusion clouding her features. "I don't remember learning it, but she won't stop calling. Every night she calls for her papa, and every night the dark swallows her voice." Before Tom could respond, hoofbeats thundered into the yard. Deputy Sheriff Marcus Holloway dismounted his black gelding with practiced ease, his badge catching the early morning light. He was a handsome man, about 38, with dark hair slicked back and eyes that seemed to see everything. He'd been in Cedar Valley for 4 years now, arriving just before Tom's family tragedy, and had quickly earned a reputation for moral righteousness and community protection. "Morning, Tom," Marcus called out, his voice carrying false warmth. "Heard there might be some trouble out here. Mrs. Henderson mentioned some concerning sounds coming from your property." Tom's jaw clenched. Mrs. Henderson lived 2 miles away. How could she have heard anything? And how had Marcus arrived so quickly? "No trouble here, Deputy, just morning chores." Marcus's gaze swept past Tom to where Rachel still knelt by the carved beam. Something dark flickered across his features before his practiced smile returned. "Rachel, sweetheart, what are you doing out here in your night clothes? You'll catch your death." The way he said her name with too much familiarity, too much possession, made Tom's skin crawl. Rachel scrambled to her feet, wrapping her arms around herself as if trying to disappear. "I'm sorry," she stammered, backing toward the barn wall. "I don't know why I came out here. I don't remember." "Of course you don't, dear one." Marcus stepped into the barn, and Rachel flinched as if he'd raised a hand to strike her. "You've been having those episodes again, the ones we discussed. Remember what Dr. Miller said about your condition?" "What condition?" Tom demanded. Marcus turned to him with the patience of a man explaining simple concepts to a child. "Rachel suffers from hysteria, Tom, brought on by the trauma of her difficult past. Sometimes her mind creates stories, fantasies to cope with memories too painful to bear." "I carved the name," Rachel whispered, staring at her bloody fingernails. "I remember carving it, but I don't know why." "Because your mind is trying to heal itself, precious girl." Marcus's voice took on the cadence of a preacher. "But healing requires proper guidance, professional care." His eyes locked with Tom's, and there was steel beneath the velvet. "I think it's time Rachel came back to my place for a while. until these episodes pass. No. The word escaped Tom before he could stop it. She's fine here. She's been fine for months. Have you been taking your medicine, Rachel? Marcus asked, ignoring Tom entirely. The laudanum I prescribed for your nerves. Medicine. That explained the memory gaps, the confusion, the way she sometimes seemed to drift through conversations like smoke. Tom's hands clenched into fists. She doesn't need medicine. She needs answers. Marcus's smile never wavered, but his eyes went cold as winter stone. Sometimes, Tom, the kindest thing we can do is protect people from truths too heavy for them to bear. The confrontation in the barn ended with Marcus leading Rachel away like a lamb to slaughter, her bare feet stumbling over the frozen ground as she cast one desperate look back at Tom. That look haunted him for the rest of the morning as he went through the motions of farm work, his mind churning with questions that had no comfortable answers. It was while mucking out the horse stalls that he found it. Hidden beneath a loose floorboard, wrapped in oiled cloth like a sacred relic, was Mary's locket. The gold chain had tarnished with age, but Tom would have recognized it anywhere. He'd given it to his daughter on her 18th birthday, just months before the accident. Inside the oval pendant was a photograph of their family, himself, Ellen, and Mary standing in front of the farmhouse on a bright Sunday morning. But something was wrong with the picture. Mary's face had been carefully scratched out with a pin, the emulsion scraped away until only blank space remained. In its place, someone had pasted a tiny photograph of Rachel's face, cut with surgical precision to fit the oval frame. The effect was deeply unsettling, as if Rachel had been inserted into his family's history, erasing his daughter's existence entirely. Tom's hands shook as he studied the locket. Mary had been wearing it the day she died. He'd searched the wreckage of their overturned wagon for hours, desperate to find some piece of her to bury with honor. The sheriff, Marcus, had told him it must have been thrown clear during the accident, probably lost forever in the tall grass. But here it was, hidden in his own barn by a woman who claimed not to remember her past. That evening, Tom rode into Cedar Valley with the locket burning like a coal in his vest pocket. He needed answers, and there was only one person in town who might provide them without asking too many questions in return. Doc Miller's office sat above the pharmacy on Main Street, accessible by a narrow staircase that creaked with every step. The old physician had delivered half the babies in Cedar Valley, including Mary, and his discretion was legendary. If anyone would listen to Tom's impossible suspicions without declaring him mad, it would be Jonas Miller. "Tom Whitfield," Doc Miller said, looking up from his medical journals. "Been a while since you darkened my doorstep. What brings you to town after dark?" Tom pulled out the locket and set it on the doctor's desk. "I need you to tell me about Rachel's medical condition." Doc Miller's face went carefully neutral as he picked up the locket, examining it in the lamplight. "You know I can't discuss a patient's private affairs, Tom. This belonged to my daughter. Mary was wearing it when she died 3 years ago. I found it hidden in my barn this morning." The silence stretched between them like a taut wire. Finally, Doc Miller set down the locket and reached for a bottle of whiskey he kept for medicinal purposes. He poured 2 glasses without asking if Tom wanted one. "How much do you really know about that girl working for you?" "I know she appeared in town 6 months ago with no past and no papers. I know she cooks like my wife, hums like my daughter, and has episodes where she talks to people who aren't there." Tom's voice grew harder. "And I know Marcus Holloway takes a mighty keen interest in her welfare." Doc Miller drained his whiskey in one swallow. "Marcus brought her to me when she first arrived. Said she'd been found wandering the roads, confused and traumatized. No memory of who she was or where she came from. Classic case of hysteria brought on by shock," he said. "You believed him? At first?" The doctor's weathered face looked older in the lamplight. "But her symptoms, They weren't consistent with hysteria. The memory loss was too selective, too convenient. She remembered how to read and write, how to cook complex meals, how to care for livestock, but nothing about her family, her past, even her real name. Tom leaned forward. "What kind of medicine has Marcus been giving her?" "Laudanum, mostly. Says it calms her nerves." Doc Miller's expression darkened. "But I've seen laudanum addicts, Tom. They get drowsy, sluggish, dependent. Rachel shows signs of something else entirely. Memory suppression, psychological manipulation." The words hit Tom like physical blows. "You think Marcus is drugging her to keep her confused?" "I think Marcus Holloway isn't the man this town believes him to be." Doc Miller refilled his glass, his hand trembling slightly. "There's something you should know, Tom, about the night your family died." Tom's blood turned to ice water. "What about it?" "I was the one who examined the bodies. Ellen died from the wagon crash, just like Marcus reported." "But Mary—" Doc Miller paused, struggling with words he'd obviously kept buried for years. "Mary wasn't in that wagon when it went over the ravine. Her injuries were wrong, Tom. All wrong." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying your daughter didn't die in that accident. Someone wanted us to think she did. But the evidence doesn't match. I tried to tell Marcus, but he said I was mistaken, that trauma can confuse even experienced doctors. He had me sign the death certificate anyway." Tom's world tilted on its axis. "You think Mary survived?" "I think someone took your daughter, Tom. I think they staged her death and made sure the investigation went nowhere. And I think that same someone has been keeping her drugged and confused for 3 years, calling her by a different name." The locket seemed to burn against Tom's palm as understanding crashed over him like a prairie storm. Rachel's green eyes, Mary's green eyes, Rachel's auburn hair, Mary's auburn hair. The way she moved through his house like she belonged there because she did belong there. "Dear God," he whispered. "Rachel is Mary." The revelation hit Tom like a physical blow, leaving him gasping for air in Doc Miller's dimly lit office. His daughter, his Mary, had been living under his own roof for 6 months, drugged and broken and believing herself to be someone else entirely. The magnitude of Marcus's cruelty was staggering, but what cut deepest was his own blindness. How had he not recognized his own child? "I should have known," Tom whispered, his voice breaking. "A father should know his own daughter." Doc Miller leaned forward, his weathered face creased with sympathy. "Tom, listen to me. Marcus is a master manipulator. He's had 3 years to perfect his control over Mary. The drugs, the psychological conditioning, he's essentially created a new person in her mind. The fact that she's fighting through it, remembering pieces, that's a testament to her strength." Tom studied the locket again, seeing it with new eyes. The careful way Mary's face had been removed and replaced with Rachel's wasn't just vandalism. It was a symbol of complete identity replacement. Marcus hadn't just stolen his daughter. He'd stolen her very sense of self. Why? Tom's hands clenched into fists. Why would he do this to her? To us? Power, Doc Miller said simply. Some men need to control everything around them, especially things they see as pure or innocent. Marcus lost his own family in a fire when he was 12. Whole family burned alive while he watched, helpless. I think it broke something fundamental in him. The pieces began falling into place in Tom's mind. Marcus's obsession with protecting young women, his need to be seen as a savior, his twisted belief that he was keeping them safe from a cruel world. In his damaged mind, kidnapping Mary wasn't a crime. It was a rescue. There's more, Doc Miller continued, reaching into his desk drawer. I've been keeping records, trying to document Mary's real condition versus what Marcus reports. Look at this. He spread out several pages covered in careful handwriting, medical observations, behavioral notes, physical examinations. The picture they painted was damning. "See these marks here?" Doc Miller pointed to sketches of old scars on Rachel's arms and legs. "They're consistent with restraints. And these burn marks on her wrists, they match the size and shape of iron shackles. This girl has been imprisoned, Tom, for years." Tom's vision blurred with rage. "That son of a—" "There's more. I've been tracking other cases, other young women who've gone missing in the territory. At least 8 in the past 5 years, all around Mary's age, all described as troubled or mentally unstable by Marcus before they disappeared." The scope of Marcus's crimes was staggering. Tom realized they weren't dealing with a single act of obsession, but a systematic pattern of predation. "Where are they? The other girls?" Doc Miller's expression grew even darker. "2 were found dead, supposedly suicide. The others, no one knows. Marcus always has explanations. They ran away, they found new lives elsewhere, they were reunited with distant relatives. But there are never any witnesses, never any letters or contact afterward." Tom stood abruptly, pacing to the window that overlooked Main Street. Marcus's office was visible from here, a yellow square of lamplight in the darkness. Somewhere in this town, his daughter was being held captive by a monster wearing a badge. "We have to get her away from him," Tom said. "Tonight." "Tom, wait." Doc Miller grabbed his arm. "You can't just storm in there. Marcus has convinced half this town that he's protecting Rachel from her own madness. If you try to take her, he'll have you arrested for kidnapping. Or worse." "Then what do you suggest?" "That I leave my daughter in the hands of that bastard for another day? We need evidence. Real evidence that even Marcus can't explain away. And we need allies." Doc Miller moved to his window, checking the street before drawing the curtains. "There are others who've had suspicions about Marcus. Mrs. Henderson, despite her fear, has been keeping track of the women who've gone missing. Reverend Clark has questioned some of Marcus's explanations for the deaths. Even Sheriff Johnson in the next county has wondered about the number of accidents in our area. Why haven't they acted? Fear. Marcus has power, influence. He's made examples of people who've crossed him, lost jobs, false accusations, mysterious accidents. This town is afraid of him." Tom felt a cold determination settling over him like armor. Then it's time someone stood up to him. "There's something else," Doc Miller said quietly. "I think Mary, Rachel, is starting to remember on her own. The episodes are getting stronger, more frequent. That's why Marcus has been increasing her dosage lately, trying to push her memories back down, but it's not working as well as it used to." Hope flickered in Tom's chest. "She's fighting back." "In her own way, yes. But Tom, when those memories fully return, the trauma is going to be overwhelming. She'll remember not just who she was, but everything that was done to her. She's going to need all the love and support we can give her." Tom thought about the way Rachel flinched when someone approached too quickly, the way she jumped at sudden noises, the haunted look that sometimes crossed her face when she thought no one was watching. His little girl had been living in hell for 3 years, and he'd been powerless to help her. "What's our next move?" Doc Miller pulled out a map of the county. "First, we document everything. I'll write up my medical observations officially. We need to search Marcus's property for evidence. I suspect he's keeping trophies from his victims. And we need to find a way to communicate with Mary without alerting Marcus." "How?" "Mrs. Henderson has been receiving mysterious notes at the general store. Short messages signed with just the letter M. She's been saving them, thinking they were from someone's sweetheart. But now—" Doc Miller pulled out a small bundle of papers tied with string. Tom's hands shook as he unfolded the first note. The handwriting was feminine, careful, like Mary's had been when she was young. "Papa, if you can hear me, I'm lost but not gone. The kind man with sad eyes feels familiar. Why does his voice sound like home? Tom's knees gave out, and he sank into a chair. His daughter had been trying to reach him for months, leaving messages like breadcrumbs in a dark forest, hoping against hope that someone would understand. "She knows," he whispered. "Somewhere deep down she knows who she is, and who you are," Doc Miller confirmed. "Marcus hasn't broken her completely, Tom. There's still hope." Outside, the church bell chimed midnight, its bronze voice carrying across the sleeping town. Somewhere in that darkness, Mary was trapped in a nightmare that had lasted 3 years. But now her father knew the truth, and he would move heaven and earth to bring her home. "Tomorrow," Tom said, his voice steady with resolve. "Tomorrow we start fighting back." Doc Miller nodded grimly. "Just remember, Tom, Marcus isn't going to give her up without a fight. When cornered, predators become desperate, and desperate men with badges can be very dangerous indeed." Tom didn't sleep that night. Instead, he sat on his porch with Ellen's old rifle across his knees, watching the road that led to town and planning his daughter's rescue. The autumn wind carried the scent of dying leaves and the promise of winter, but all Tom could think about was the look of confused terror in Rachel's, Mary's, eyes as Marcus led her away. By dawn, he had a plan. The first step was reconnaissance. Tom saddled his horse and rode toward Marcus's cabin, which sat on 5 acres at the edge of town like a fortress guarding its secrets. The deputy had built it himself when he first arrived in Cedar Valley, claiming he needed privacy for his spiritual contemplations. Now Tom understood what Marcus had really been contemplating. The cabin was larger than it appeared from the road, with a stone foundation and thick log walls that would muffle any sounds from within. Windows were set high and narrow, more like gun slits than openings meant to welcome light. A heavy wooden door bore multiple locks, and Tom noticed scratch marks around the frame, as if someone had clawed desperately at the wood from the inside. Behind the main cabin stood a smaller structure that looked like a root cellar, its door secured with a heavy iron padlock. Fresh earth had been disturbed around its foundation, and Tom's blood ran cold as he realized what Marcus might have buried there. "You're up early, Tom." Tom spun to find Marcus emerging from the cabin's front door, fully dressed and alert despite the early hour. His deputy's badge caught the morning light like a warning. "Could say the same about you," Tom replied, keeping his voice steady. "Thought I'd ride into town early, check on supplies before the day gets away from me." Marcus's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Rachel had another episode last night. Kept calling for someone named Mary, begging this person to come home. Very disturbing." "I had to increase her medication to help her rest." The casual cruelty in Marcus's voice made Tom's hands itch for his rifle. Maybe she'd be better off at my place. Familiar surroundings might help. "Oh, I don't think so. Rachel needs constant supervision now. Professional care." Marcus stepped closer, and Tom caught the metallic scent of blood on his clothes. "Sometimes the kindest thing we can do for damaged souls is keep them away from people who might confuse them further." The threat was unmistakable. Tom nodded curtly and turned his horse toward town, feeling Marcus's eyes on his back like cold steel. But he'd seen what he needed to see. Mary was being held in that cabin, and Marcus was growing more paranoid by the day. In town, Tom made his rounds carefully, speaking in low voices with the people Doc Miller had identified as potential allies. Mrs. Henderson confirmed she'd been receiving more notes signed M, including one that had arrived just that morning. "The dark place has no windows. He says I'm sick, but I remember sunshine. I remember Papa's hands teaching me to braid wheat." The words broke Tom's heart and strengthened his resolve simultaneously. His daughter was fighting her way back to the surface, one memory at a time. Reverend Clark revealed he'd been troubled by Marcus's frequent requests to bless troubled women in private ceremonies. He claims to be driving out demons of madness, but something about his methods—" The Reverend shuddered. "There's nothing holy about the way he looks at those poor girls." Even Sheriff Johnson from Millerville, the next county over, admitted he'd been tracking an unusual pattern of missing women in the area. Young, pretty, from families with no means to make a fuss when they disappear. "It's been going on for years, but every time I try to investigate, Marcus provides explanations that technically satisfy the law." By noon, Tom had assembled a small but determined group. Doc Miller would document the medical evidence of abuse. Mrs. Henderson would gather the notes and any other physical evidence. Reverend Clark would provide moral authority when they confronted the town council. Sheriff Johnson would ensure that justice extended beyond Cedar Valley's borders, but they needed one more thing: proof of Mary's true identity. That afternoon, Tom returned to his farm and searched through Ellen's old sewing box until he found what he was looking for. When Mary was 16, she'd pricked her finger on a needle and bled onto a sampler she'd been embroidering. Ellen had insisted on keeping the blood-stained cloth, saying it was part of their daughter's story. At the time, Tom had thought it morbid. Now he realized it might be the key to saving her. Doc Miller had mentioned that blood could be compared under a microscope, a new technique he'd learned from a colleague in Kansas City. If they could get a sample from Rachel and compare it to Mary's blood on the sampler, they'd have scientific proof that Marcus couldn't explain away. The plan they devised was simple but dangerous. That evening, during Marcus's weekly visit to the saloon, a routine he never missed, Tom would approach the cabin. Mrs. Henderson would create a distraction by reporting a theft at her store, requiring Marcus's immediate attention. In the confusion, Tom would attempt to reach Mary and get the blood sample they needed. It was risky. If Marcus caught him, he'd likely disappear just like the other people who'd crossed the deputy. But Tom had spent 3 years believing his daughter was dead. He wouldn't spend another day knowing she was alive and suffering. As sunset painted the prairie sky in shades of orange and purple, Tom cleaned his rifle and checked his pockets for the small knife and clean cloth he'd need for the blood sample. Mary's sampler rested against his heart, its faded bloodstain a promise that had waited 3 years to be fulfilled. "I'm coming, Mary," he whispered to the gathering darkness. "Papa's coming to take you home." In the distance, Cedar Valley's church bell tolled 7 times, marking the beginning of the most important night of Tom Whitfield's life. Either he would rescue his daughter from hell, or he would die trying. But he would not leave her in Marcus's hands for another sunset. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain and change. Storm clouds gathered on the horizon, as if nature itself was preparing for the confrontation to come. The plan unraveled before it even began. Tom had barely reached the edge of Marcus's property when he saw the smoke rising from behind the cabin. Not the gentle curl of chimney smoke, but thick black columns that spoke of something large and desperate burning. His heart hammered against his ribs as he spurred his horse forward, abandoning all pretense of stealth. The scene that greeted him would haunt his nightmares forever. Marcus stood in the clearing behind his cabin, feeding papers and photographs into a roaring bonfire. Even from a distance, Tom could see what was burning: evidence, documentation of crimes, trophies from victims. The deputy was destroying everything, preparing to run. And beside the fire, barely visible in the dancing shadows, sat a figure in a white nightgown. Mary was chained to a wooden post, her auburn hair matted with blood, her green eyes wide with terror as she watched her captor burn away the last traces of the other women he'd destroyed. "Mary!" The cry tore from Tom's throat before he could stop it. Marcus spun toward the sound, his hand dropping to his gun. "I wondered when you'd finally come calling, Tom Whitfield." Tom dismounted slowly, his rifle trained on the deputy. "Let her go, Marcus. It's over." "Over?" Marcus laughed, the sound sharp and brittle in the night air. "This is just the beginning. Rachel and I are leaving tonight, heading west where small-minded people won't interfere with God's work. Her name is Mary. She's my daughter, and you've tortured her for 3 years. Your daughter died in that wagon accident, Marcus snarled. I found this broken creature wandering the roads mad with grief and trauma. I've spent years healing her, protecting her from the cruelties of this world. But even as he spoke, Mary was shaking her head. The drug-induced haze that had clouded her mind for so long was lifting, burned away by the shock of seeing her father again. "Papa?" she whispered, the word carrying 3 years of pain and hope. "Papa, is it really you?" The recognition in her voice hit Tom like a physical blow. His little girl was still in there, fighting her way back to the surface despite everything Marcus had done to break her. "I'm here, sweetheart. Papa's here." Marcus's face contorted with rage. "No! She's mine! I saved her. I protected her." He yanked on Mary's chain, dragging her closer to him. "Tell him, Rachel! Tell him how I kept you safe from all the pain out there." But Mary was remembering now, the memories flooding back like water through a broken dam. The wagon accident, waking up in Marcus's cabin, the drugs, the endless nights of psychological torture designed to strip away her identity, the other women who'd screamed in the darkness until they screamed no more. "You killed them," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Sarah and Emma and all the others. You killed them when they wouldn't pretend to love you." Marcus's mask finally slipped completely. The benevolent protector disappeared, revealing the monster beneath. "They were ungrateful. They refused to see that I was saving them, just like you refused to see it now." He pressed his gun against Mary's temple, his hand shaking with fury. "Stay back, Whitfield. I'll kill her before I let you poison her mind with lies." Tom felt his world balance on a knife's edge. One wrong word, one sudden movement, and he would lose his daughter forever. But in Mary's eyes he saw something that gave him hope. She wasn't the broken victim Marcus believed her to be. 3 years of hell had forged her into something stronger than steel. "Do it," she said quietly, meeting her captor's gaze without flinching. "Kill me, Marcus, because I'll never be your daughter. I'll never love you. I'll never be anything but your victim." The truth hit Marcus like a physical blow. All his delusions, all his justifications crumbled in the face of her defiance. Marcus's gun trembled against Mary's temple as the weight of her words sank in. For 3 years, he had lived in a fantasy where he was the savior, the protector, the beloved father figure. Now, faced with the stark reality of his victim's hatred, something fundamental cracked in his mind. "You don't mean that," he whispered, his voice breaking like a child's. "You're just confused. The memories are making you say things you don't understand." "I understand perfectly." Mary's voice was steady, stronger than it had been in years. "I understand that you murdered my mother. I understand that you've been keeping me prisoner. And I understand that you're a monster wearing a badge." The gun in Marcus's hand shook violently. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool autumn air. "I saved you. When I found you after the accident, you were broken, crying for parents who were already dead. I gave you a new life, a better life. You gave me hell." Mary's green eyes blazed with fury and pain. "You drugged me until I couldn't remember my own name. You told me my family abandoned me. You made me believe I was crazy so I'd be grateful for your care." Tom watched the exchange with his heart in his throat, knowing that one wrong word could trigger Marcus into pulling that trigger. But he also saw something miraculous happening. His daughter was finding her voice again, reclaiming her identity from the man who tried to steal it. "The other women," Mary continued, her voice growing stronger with each revelation, "I remember them now. Sarah screamed for 3 days before you gave up on healing her, Emma tried to escape, so you chained her in the root cellar until she starved, and little Annie, she was only 17 when you decided she was too corrupted to save." Marcus's face went white. "How do you were sedated during a— You didn't sedate me enough." "I heard everything. I saw everything. I know where you buried them." The confession hit Tom like a physical blow. His daughter had been forced to witness Marcus's murders, had lived for 3 years knowing she could be next if she stepped out of line. The psychological torture was even worse than he'd imagined. "You were supposed to love me," Marcus whispered. And for a moment, he sounded like the broken 12-year-old boy who'd watched his family burn. "I gave you everything. I protected you from a world that would have destroyed your innocence." "Love?" Mary laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You don't know what love means. Love doesn't chain people up. Love doesn't drug them into submission. Love doesn't murder other women to keep one person isolated and afraid." Something snapped in Marcus's eyes. The last vestige of his delusion crumbled, leaving only rage and desperation. "If I can't have you, no one can." He pulled the trigger, but Mary had been expecting it. 3 years of surviving in hell had taught her to read every micro-expression, every tell that preceded violence. She threw herself sideways just as the gun fired, the bullet singing harmlessly into the night air. Tom's rifle boomed in response, the shot echoing across the prairie like thunder. Marcus spun and fell, clutching his shoulder, his gun skittering away across the hard-packed earth. For a moment, silence reigned except for the crackling of the dying fire and Marcus's labored breathing. Then Mary spoke, her voice carrying a strength that 3 years of torture hadn't been able to break. "It's over." Tom ran to his daughter, his hands shaking as he worked to free her from the chains. The metal had cut deep grooves into her wrists, and her body bore the marks of years of abuse. But her spirit, her precious, indomitable spirit, remained unbroken. "I knew you'd come," she whispered as the chains fell away. "Even when I couldn't remember your name, I knew someone out there loved me enough to find me." Tom pulled her into his arms, feeling the solid reality of her after 3 years of believing she was dead. "I never stopped looking, sweetheart. Not for one single day." Behind them, Marcus struggled to sit up, blood seeping through his fingers. "You don't understand," he gasped. "She needs protection. The world is cruel, and innocent souls like hers. The only thing she needed protection from was you," Tom said, his voice cold as winter stone. In the distance, hoofbeats announced the arrival of Sheriff Johnson and Doc Miller, drawn by the gunshots. Justice was coming at last to Cedar Valley, but Tom barely noticed. His daughter was alive, she was safe, and she was home. Mary pulled back to look at her father's face, her green eyes bright with tears of relief and recognition. "I remember now," she said. "I remember everything." The good and the bad, but especially the love. The fire behind them guttered and died, taking Marcus's secrets with it into ash and smoke. But from those ashes, the Whitfield family was being reborn. 6 months later, Tom stood on his front porch watching the sunrise paint the wheat fields gold, listening to a sound he'd thought he'd never hear again, his daughter's laughter drifting from the kitchen where she was making breakfast. The sound was different now, tempered by experience and loss, but it was real, and it was Mary's. The road to healing hadn't been easy. The first weeks after her rescue had been the hardest, as Mary's memories returned in waves of trauma and revelation. There were nights when she woke screaming, days when she couldn't bear to be touched, moments when the weight of what she'd endured threatened to crush her spirit entirely. But she was stronger than Marcus had ever understood. With Doc Miller's help and the support of people who truly loved her, Mary had slowly begun to reclaim her life. The physical scars would fade with time, but the emotional ones required patience, understanding, and the kind of unconditional love that only family could provide. The truth about Marcus's crimes had rocked Cedar Valley to its foundations. Sheriff Johnson's investigation had uncovered 7 bodies buried around the deputy's property, young women from across the territory who'd fallen prey to his twisted salvation complex. The community that had once revered him as a protector now struggled to understand how they'd been so thoroughly deceived. Some townspeople had known more than they'd admitted. Mrs. Patterson, the banker's wife, confessed she'd suspected something was wrong, but had been too afraid to speak up. Several others had received payments from Marcus to keep quiet about suspicious activities. The revelation had split the community, forcing everyone to confront their own complicity in the horror that had festered in their midst. But from that reckoning had come something beautiful, a renewed commitment to protecting the vulnerable. Cedar Valley had established new procedures for investigating missing persons, created a fund to support victims of violence, and most importantly, fostered a culture where speaking up was valued over staying silent. Mary had testified at Marcus's trial, her voice steady and clear as she recounted 3 years of psychological torture and abuse. The courtroom had been packed with families of his victims, and when the judge sentenced Marcus to hang for his crimes, the collective sigh of relief had been audible throughout the building. "Justice served," Tom had whispered to his daughter as they left the courthouse. "No," Mary had replied, her wisdom beyond her years. "Justice would be if none of this had ever happened. This is just closure." Now, as Tom watched his daughter move around the kitchen with growing confidence, he marveled at her resilience. She was learning to trust again, to laugh again, to dream of a future beyond survival. Dr. Miller had connected them with specialists in Kansas City who understood trauma, and slowly but surely Mary was rebuilding her sense of self. The farm was thriving again, too. With the reward money from Marcus's conviction and contributions from community members seeking to make amends, Tom had been able to pay off the mortgage and make improvements to the property. But more importantly, the house felt alive again, filled with conversation and hope instead of echoing with loneliness. Mary appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. At 22, she was a woman now, no longer the teenager who'd been stolen from him. The experiences had changed her, carved lines of wisdom around her eyes and given her a gravity that spoke of trials overcome. But her essential spirit, kind, curious, unbreakably strong, remained intact. "Breakfast is ready, Papa," she said, the word Papa still carrying extra warmth after years of forced separation. "Be right there, sweetheart." Tom took one last look at the horizon where storm clouds were building in the distance, but he wasn't afraid of storms anymore. His family had weathered the worst tempest imaginable and emerged stronger for it. Inside, Mary had set the table with Ellen's good china, a small daily ritual that honored her mother's memory while celebrating their family's survival. Fresh wildflowers from the prairie sat in a mason jar, and the smell of biscuits and bacon filled the air with the promise of another day, another chance, another blessing. "I've been thinking," Mary said as they sat down to eat. "Maybe it's time I learned to drive the wagon to town by myself. I can't hide on this farm forever." Tom felt a familiar protective instinct rise in his chest, but he pushed it down. His daughter had spent 3 years as a prisoner. She deserved to choose her own boundaries now. "Whenever you're ready," he said. "I'll teach you everything you need to know." Mary smiled, and in that expression, Tom saw not just his daughter, but a survivor, a fighter, a young woman who'd stared into the darkest corners of human nature and chosen to believe in light anyway. Outside, the first drops of rain began to fall, but inside the Whitfield farmhouse, all was warmth and hope and home. Sometimes the greatest tragedies in life become our most profound blessings in disguise. Tom Whitfield's story reminds us that even in our darkest hours, when we've lost everything we thought mattered most, there's still hope for redemption and reunion. For 3 agonizing years, he believed his beloved daughter was gone forever, yet she was closer than he ever imagined. Broken, lost, but fighting to find her way back to the love that never stopped searching for her. This powerful tale speaks to every parent's deepest fear and greatest joy. That love truly is stronger than any force trying to tear our families apart. In a world where we often feel helpless against forces beyond our control, Tom's unwavering determination to protect what mattered most shows us that one person's courage to stand up and speak truth can change everything. His story proves that it's never too late for miracles, never too late for healing, and never too late to fight for the people we love. Even when hope seems impossible, even when everyone else has given up, love endures and love wins. What moment in your own life required you to show courage when everyone else stayed silent? Have you ever experienced a situation where speaking up made all the difference, even when it felt dangerous? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.